Hi there, folks. It's the old folky here, John Smale, and I'm back with a new episode, carrying on from where I left off the other day, talking about the beginnings and then talking about how there's a bit of growing pains in all this. I would be very remiss if I didn't sort of start talking about the relativity of people involved, and I think it's so important right now to talk about my brothers. This episode is called Brothers in Arms, and that's what we were all our lives growing up. We grew up in a pretty happy family in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and with our sister Donna. My sister Donna was the eldest, and then my brother Bob, and then my brother Jim, and I'm the baby of the family, little Johnny boy. And we worked hard, we played hard, lived at the cottage in the summer. It wasn't a privileged life. We all worked hard. My mom and dad worked very hard. My mom was a stay-at-home mom with the old 3 meals a day routine. And more on that later. What I really want to talk about is we're talking about SmalesPace, the coffee house days in London, Ontario. 1970 to 75 is what this story episode is about. When there's so many lead-ups to all this, and these will come in other stories, but I was always wanting to open a coffee house and have a place where people could congregate. I didn't even know if it was going to be a coffee house or what it was going to be. I knew I wanted it to be something that was inclusive, not of just music, but art, poetry, the visual arts. I wanted to call whatever I opened, etc., ETC, as it were. I know it sounds kind of crazy. Bob was working. Bob had moved to London because I was living in London, going to university. Then I left university and I got on with Eaton's of Canada, doing window displays and internal store displays and building props and that kind of stuff. And it was a wonderfully creative field. Bob was a graphic artist, and he came to London and landed a great job with 3M and was in the graphics department, of course. Jim, my brother Jim, was a candle maker, a bit of a wild spirit always, but a fun guy, and a real dynamo. And Jim decided to join us in London and opened a candle workshop there. I was, as I say, I was freelancing at night, designing windows for private businesses in town. And during the day I was working for Eaton's, and at night I was playing in a couple of bands in London with Rob Smith and a couple other guys. We used to play at the York Hotel a lot, and other little small gigs around. Then I found as I was walking around the streets, I saw this for rent sign on a building on Clarence Street, 436 Clarence Street, and it was an old garage, and it was when I looked more into it, it was an old Bell telephone garage, and there was a phone number on the sign, and it said call this number. So after a couple of days, I built up enough nerve, and I phoned, and I talked to this Mrs. George, and Mrs. George was a recent widow. Her husband had passed on, and he was a funeral director. They had a funeral business in London. And she said, well, why don't you come over and talk to me? So I went over and, I talked about renting the place, and I tried to put on my best face and say, I want to open something that's going to be a very decent place for young people to hang out, and that, we weren't going to cause anybody any trouble. We were just going to have a lot of fun. And it was going to be an artistic scene, and she rather liked it. And we discussed the rent, and she said, well, it's going to be $300 a month. Now, such a joke, right? People spend $300 on dinner now, or a bottle of wine, or whatever. To me, that's a lot of money, especially in 1970, 69, 70. And so I thought, well, I can't even co-sign a loan at the age of 20. So I asked my brother, I said, could you, I had about $7,000 in the bank to invest in this. And I spoke to Bob, and he said, well, not only will I help you with the money, let's just become partners. We'll do it together. So I said, great. Bobby was always my rock. He was my, I adored him as an older brother. So I said, sure, let's do it. So we set about, we had to have a meeting with Mrs. George and, finalize the deal or whatever and convince her. So she was quite taken with Bob too, his sincerity and honesty, and we struck a deal to rent the address, which is 436 Clarence Street, which then became SmalesPace. My brother Jim decided to move to London, and as I say, he was in the candle business. Jim and I were always really close, as I said, but in business, I thought, well, this could really destroy a great friendship and a brotherhood. So I was a little reluctant, and reluctantly went into it. And it was really Bob and I that were partners, but Jim was always the third compatriot, the brothers three, whatever you want to call it. And we set to building SmalesPace as best we could with our carpenter skills. We were never afraid to pick up a hammer or a saw. And it's funny, I've been in the design business now for 40 years since those times, and it's my business now to design places like this and do space planning and layouts and learning all about code issues. Back then I knew nothing, and Bob knew a bit more than nothing, and we put together a terrific environment which people loved. Now, mind you, we improved it as it went along, but it just shows the power of brotherhood and how things can get done. Along the way, people came by and said, hey, what are you guys up to? What are you building there? And we eventually opened. We all had girlfriends. Bob's girlfriend was Evelyn Leishman, and Jimmy's girlfriend was Nancy Dolan, and my girlfriend was Ruth Clark, and together as a team, we all had duties to do every day, and we chipped in and started planning menus and how we're going to do this. It was all very egalitarian and very Aquarian, and it wasn't exactly like Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland setting out to put together a play in Uncle Jimmy's barn, but not much unlike that too. So my brothers were very instrumental in starting up, getting going, and they were so much part of the identity of the place. We had a house that we all shared on Walnut Crescent. I think that street is gone. It's like one of those big dam projects you hear about, the Thames River had to be changed around, and the beautiful cottage house that we were living in, I think it was bulldozed and is now part of the river and the conservation area or whatever. In any case, we had this house. We all lived together and then partied together at night, and let's go off to work in the morning and get this place built. My brothers were with me at SmalesPace for the first year. We had a terrific magical journey year. Many times everything was a new experiment every day. We didn't have money for musicians at first, so we did all kinds of events. I mean, when I say musicians, I mean paid touring musicians. We had local musicians who were absolutely brilliant and terrific, and we showed movies. I'd go to the library and get some Laurel and Hardy movies, Buster Keaton. I don't know if we ever did Three Stooges, but suffice to say, we did all kinds of things for entertainment, and people loved it. Mills was one of the first performers at SmalesPace. Paul is one of my dearest, oldest friends and was so instrumental in the success of SmalesPace over the years as a musician, as a producer, as a sort of a magnet who drew other musicians into the fold. And well, there's more on Paul later. There's going to be a whole episode on Paul Mills. We did all. Oh yeah, back. Just take a step back. How did it ever get called SmalesPace? Well, obviously our name was Smale, and I wanted to call the place etc. You know, probably it met with very lukewarm reception. And Ruth had a friend come down from Toronto, and he was this young ad executive and full of beans, and said, you got to call a place that has authenticity and relevance, and it's got to speak to people, and all the catchphrases of advertising. And he's probably very correct about marketing and gathering together a brand. He said it should be called SmalesPace, and there should be a snail as a logo. Well, I thought it was bizarre. I thought it was silly, and I didn't think our name should be attached to it, because we were just part of a collective of people that were going to be going through this place and being absorbed by it and participating in it and leading it. But everybody voted, and sure enough, it became SmalesPace. Now, 50 years later, my kids are running into people. Oh, Smale, your name is Smale. I used to go to a club in London, Ontario, called SmalesPace. Any relation to that? So there it is. It's one of those names that has sort of had some cachet over the years, thank goodness. And I suppose that's why I'm talking to you tonight on this chilly night. I'm very happy to talk about my brothers, because I love them dearly. Sadly, they have both passed. Bob died of cancer in the year 2000, and my brother Jim died of liver complications and in 2008. And well, I miss them dearly. Anybody that knew them misses them. Big Bob and Jimmy, as they were called. So those were the humble and fun and exciting and historical beginnings of SmalesPace. This episode is dedicated to the memory and the honor of my brothers, and I'm happy to have told that story to you. Maybe not the most humorous story, but it is the humble beginnings of SmalesPace and the journey forward. Good night, folkies, from the old folky John Smale.